Hello again, guys, here for Wednesday, May 13th, I think. Um, those of you that got that tax stuff done, got back to me about, the grading policy for this semester. Thank you for doing that. If you haven't, you can still get that stuff turned in. Touching base on the taxation stuff here real quick, and there's a concept referred to as the Laffer curve. And if you look at these two axes here, okay, the challenge that our government has, right, is how do they provide as much stuff and keep money in people's pockets and at the same time allow people the economic freedom of not having taxes because obviously they want to eventually collect as much as possible. And so there's this concept out there. It's referred to as the Laffer curve, as you can see, and notice this axis is tax revenue. That's how much money the government brings in, right? And here's our tax rate. So if our tax rate is zero, the government gets $0, right? It stays down here. If our tax rate's 100, the theory would be that people just say, forget that. I'm not working. The government takes all my money anyway. So I'm not even going to try to pay my taxes. And what the concept says is, all right, how does the government find where they maximize their tax revenue? Is it a 30% tax rate? Is it a 70% tax rate? And the question is where that percentage is. Now, for different people, it's going to be different things for different countries. But the concept really explains like the answer can't be that we just tax people more money so the government can make more money, because eventually people will decide to either quit working, not pay their taxes, maybe move to another country, retire, any number of different things that would lead to less tax revenue for the government. So just a concept there. I think most of you kind of wrap your heads around that. Looking at your answers from the tax stuff was interesting to see how well you guys understood kind of the challenges that the government faces in terms of how they're going to manage this debt, right? And as we'll see what happens with the whole stimulus plans from the coronavirus, and the government's going to go more into debt. But anyway, it's something for you to pay attention to, and hopefully that you can wrap your head around it and be able to, understand some of the challenges they're facing. Okay, so on to today's stuff. We're talking about what the federal government can do to fix some statistics. Okay, if you remember way back at the beginning of this semester, we talked about how money flows through the economy. Basically, it boils down to consumers buying stuff from businesses and consumers making business too, right? They get money, they get income, whether they're an employee or whether they're an employer, right? They have their own business. Money flows through the economy that way. Well, we also said the government says, all right, well, we got to send taxes to the government. That takes away consumers' ability to buy stuff. Okay, so the government controls some level of how much money we have to flow through the economy, so to speak. And we haven't really talked about banks. Okay, so obviously people borrow money from banks. The cost of that money is determined by interest rates, right? How much you pay, the higher the interest rate, the more expensive money is to borrow, the less money we borrow. Well, we borrow money to spend, right? We don't borrow money to save it. That doesn't make sense. So we borrow money to spend. And when we do that, obviously, if we can borrow more money, we tend to spend more on businesses. More money flows to the economy. And so we're going to talk about what the federal government can do, fiscal policy, and the central bank, the Federal Reserve, monetary policy can do to affect the flow of money. And again, we're going to be trying to fix certain things within the economy. Maybe it's a high inflation rate. Maybe it's a high unemployment rate. Maybe it's to spark our GDP. Okay, so we'll talk about that. Hopefully it makes some sense. We're going to go through pretty quick. Remember, quick review that inflation and unemployment, okay, so unemployment is in blue. So when unemployment's high, right, inflation tends to go down. It's not perfect. They don't always go up and down equally, but you can see unemployment's high, inflation goes down. Unemployment's high, inflation goes down. And when inflation gets better, when unemployment gets better, starts to go down, think about what's happening. More people have money, right? They spend money, prices tend to go up. Okay, and so what we need to understand is that when we fix one, the other one is going to be affected negatively. Okay, so as we go through that, we talk about those trade-offs and what the government has to kind of deal with. Okay, so notice that we have two columns here. We've got our fiscal policy and our monetary policy column. All right, so fiscal policy, what you need to understand, that's the federal government. That's the president and Congress. Okay, so fiscal policy is federal government. Now, monetary policy is controlled in the United States by the Federal Reserve. All right. And notice I try to make it as clear as possible. This is going to be loans from banks. All right. They control how much money banks are allowed to loan out. All right. And again, banks want to loan out money. That's how they make money. We'll talk a lot more about monetary policy in the next one, in the next video. But anyway, that's what that monetary policy has to do. Two completely different groups of people. Federal Reserve is not the federal government. Federal government is not the Federal Reserve. Two completely different things. Now, let's say that our economy has an inflation problem, and so maybe that's caused by any number of things. Maybe it's caused by expensive gasoline. Maybe it's caused by people just making so much money that they're spending so much so fast. So the government wants to fix inflation. Sometimes it's referred to as they want to perform a tight money policy. They want to perform a leakage of money, contractionary policy, that our economy is moving too fast. Okay. So basically, the government wants us to stop spending money. All right. One way or the other, the government wants us to stop spending money. That's how we decrease demand for stuff. So they can only do two things. All right. They can change taxes and they can change government spending. And if they're going to take money out of people's pockets to decrease demand, the way with taxes they do that is they raise taxes, or they can decrease government spending. And whether that means they are taking away from unemployment benefits, decreasing spending on Social Security, decreasing spending on, military. It could be any of those things to take money out of the economy. Okay. The goal is to fix inflation. However, our unemployment rate is going to go up and our GDP is going to decrease. Okay. So, one of the things was when President Obama, especially, and President Trump's going to face probably a pretty similar circumstance because of the stimulus plans for the coronavirus stuff, which I'm making a prediction with that. But the big challenge for President Obama was that unemployment, everybody was collecting it, and our government was going into an extreme amount of debt. And so the Republicans at the time said, hey, this debt needs to stop. We need to decrease government spending. Well, President Obama at the time was stuck between a rock and a hard place, because if he decreases government spending to fix some of the deficit, some of the debt, well, what's going to happen if he decreases spending? Well, we're going to have unemployment be even worse. So he's stuck between a rock and a hard place in that particular time, which, again, every president's going to face that rock and a hard place in those types of situations. So again, what I'm trying to get you to understand is the trade-off. Monetary policy, that's going to talk about basically how do we get people to borrow less money. Well, the way that we get people to borrow less money is we raise interest rates. Okay. So if we raise interest rates, people can't borrow as much. They can't spend as much. Same positive, same negative. The result stays the same, whether it's the monetary policy, Federal Reserve, or fiscal policy, the government trying to fix inflation. All right. So if we're going to fix unemployment, we're going to do the exact opposite. We're going to inject money into the economy. Sometimes you hear stimulus. Okay. So there's a few different words they use to inject money into the economy. Fiscal policy, we got to put money in people's pockets. Lower taxes, increase government spending. Those are the two things that they can do. Okay, right now they're trying to inject money in the policy into the economy. They're calling it a tax break due to getting a tax return back. Same thing. They're putting money in. They're lowering taxes. Okay, in that particular case. So notice the positive is a lower unemployment. GDP also increases, but people get more money. That could lead to more inflation. Monetary policy, instead of making credit expensive, they want people to borrow money, so they make it cheap. They lower interest rates, and that's going to lower unemployment and raise inflation also. Okay, so pretty simple concepts if you can remember and think about what the government's allowed to do in terms of putting money into people's pockets. Okay, and then keeping monetary policy straight as the opposite side of things. Overall, the fiscal policy advantages can be that as long as they can vote, like it took maybe like a week and a half, 2 weeks for the president to and Congress to approve these plans, right? And if you have direct deposit and you paid your taxes, you got those checks pretty quick, 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks maybe. Once those checks got distributed, I know there's a little bit of a slowdown with people that either haven't paid their taxes or if they don't have direct deposit. But anyway, it can be implemented pretty much right away. Now the challenge is when there's hard decisions to make, okay, is that remember, I still got to get elected. So presidents and congressmen, they don't like to say, hey, listen, our economy is doing too well right now. We're going to raise taxes so it slows down a little bit. They're not going to get elected. So politicians don't like to implement those unpopular choices, okay? Monetary policy. Now, the nice thing about these people, which we'll go more into detail later this week, is that these people cannot be elected out of office. So they're appointed by the president. It's kind of like the Supreme Court, okay? Similar concept, where they don't have to worry about getting elected out of office, so they can do some things that, may not be popular. However, again, we're dealing with loans. We don't necessarily borrow money each and every day. So some of those things it takes time for that stuff to quote unquote trickle through the economy is kind of the word that you might hear sometimes. Okay. That is what I've got for you today. Your question was written in the original email. I appreciate you guys still getting stuff turned in. We got 2 more weeks left basically. All righty. And just 2 more video lectures for you before we cut things out here. Okay. So, keep working at it. Okay. Keep hanging in there. Keep staying positive, and we will talk soon.